In the year 2379, the people of Earth received a signal from deep space, strange, rhythmic pulses that carried not just data but a message. Prepare for evaluation. At first, the scientists at the Global Space Alliance thought it was a prank or a mistake, but the patterns were too perfect, too intelligent. Within days, a massive alien ship appeared at the edge of the solar system, the size of a continent, moving with silent purpose. It didn't fire, it didn't speak, it just waited. Then, without warning, it projected a hologram into Earth's orbit, visible to every satellite, space station, and broadcast channel on the planet. In the center of the glowing image stood a tall, silver-skinned being with 6 eyes and a voice like thunder. "We are the Zarkith Dominion. We rule half the galaxy. We offer protection to the worthy. Submit or be erased." The words echoed across Earth in every language. World leaders gathered, armies prepared, and citizens panicked. It wasn't just a first contact. It was a challenge. For centuries, humans had wondered if they were alone. Now they had their answer. And that answer came with a threat. The Zarkith Dominion was known across the stars as the most feared alliance of warrior species. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, crushed rebellions without mercy, and enslaved entire civilizations. They respected strength and destroyed weakness. According to the few intercepted transmissions, they believed Earth was too primitive to resist. Their scouts had studied human weapons, technology, and even biology. And they laughed. They expected surrender within days. What they didn't understand, however, was that Earth's true strength was never in its machines. It was in something far more difficult to measure, something no scanner could detect and no AI could predict. And so, when the Zarkith envoy landed on Earth demanding unconditional surrender, the leaders of humanity did something no other species had dared. They refused, not with arrogance, but with quiet determination. "We are not afraid," said the president of the Unified Earth Council. "We may fall, but we will not kneel." The first attack came without warning. Over 100 alien ships descended through the skies like burning stars, striking military bases, communication centers, and power grids. The invaders believed that within hours, Earth would be under control. But they were wrong. Human forces responded with unexpected coordination and fierce resistance. Old enemies united. Soldiers fought in cities, forests, and deserts with a passion that caught the Dominion off guard. Even when outnumbered and outgunned, the humans refused to break. Civilian networks helped troops move. Scientists turned everyday tools into improvised weapons. And the people didn't hide. They helped. A baker in New York became a supply officer. A student in Nairobi helped decode enemy signals. A mechanic in Lahore repaired damaged tanks under fire. The war was not just between armies. It was between civilizations. And for the first time in centuries, the Zarkith Dominion found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't behave the way their simulations predicted. What truly confused the Dominion was the humans' reaction to defeat. When ships were lost or cities destroyed, the people didn't fall into chaos. Instead, they rebuilt faster. When soldiers died, others took their place. But even more shocking was what happened after the battles. Humans sang. They told stories. They remembered the fallen not with silence, but with fire in their hearts. They celebrated courage, honored sacrifice, and shared hope like it was a weapon. Dominion analysts were ordered to study human psychology, to find out what made them so resistant. They found no logic in it. Why would a race on the edge of extinction still joke, still love, still dream? Why did a mother write poems to her son fighting in orbit? Why did a firefighter sing to keep children calm during an air raid? Why did a wounded soldier with no legs still ask to return to the front? The aliens didn't understand, and that lack of understanding became fear. As the war continued, the Zarkith began to notice a pattern. Human forces were not the strongest, nor the fastest, but they never gave up. They used strange tactics, faking surrender, hiding in ruins, luring ships into storms. But what truly unnerved the Zarkith commanders was the way humans smiled before a battle. It wasn't madness. It was something deeper, something ancient, something that had helped humanity survive its own brutal history. The Dominion began to ask themselves, what kind of creature fights without hope of victory, and still believes it can win? What kind of species faces death, and still dares to laugh? The answer was not in any weapon, ship, or strategy. It was in the human spirit, a force the Dominion had never faced before, a force that refused to be measured, predicted, or controlled. The war was far from over, but one thing had changed forever. The Zarkith no longer saw Earth as weak. They now saw it as dangerous, not because of its machines, but because of its people, because Earth had revealed a weapon more powerful than any gun or missile, a weapon that no one in the galaxy had expected, a weapon that could not be built, only born. And it had a name: humanity. The Zarkith Dominion had never known fear, not the kind that crept into your bones and whispered that something was deeply wrong. For centuries, they had conquered worlds with ease, reduced civilizations to ash, and stood unchallenged across galaxies. Their elite warriors, bred for strength and discipline, had been trained since birth to destroy without emotion and to obey without question. They believed fear was a weakness of lesser beings, but after their invasion of Earth began, something strange happened. The warriors who returned from battle began to change. Silent, shaken, some refused to speak, others requested reassignment, and a few even asked for exile, a dishonor unheard of among their kind. At first, their commanders dismissed it as an anomaly, perhaps a rare form of psychological disruption caused by Earth's atmosphere or some hidden chemical agent. But when the behavior spread across entire battalions, and seasoned generals began reporting unexplainable feelings of unease, the Dominion could no longer ignore the truth. These were not soldiers who had faced defeat. These were warriors who had encountered something they could not understand, something that had no shape, no code, and no clear reason. They had encountered humans, and for the first time in their lives, they had come face to face with an enemy that made them feel afraid. The reports they brought back made little sense. One squad claimed they ambushed a group of human soldiers, only to find them singing under heavy fire. Another described a medic who shielded enemy wounded with her body, refusing to let anyone die, even those on the other side. There were stories of humans who smiled before a hopeless charge, who joked with each other while pinned down, and who risked their lives to save strangers. A captured Dominion pilot told of a human who freed him from wreckage and then walked away without asking for anything in return. None of these actions matched any known battle logic. The Dominion prided itself on discipline and fear-based tactics. They believed in domination through superior power, but humans didn't follow those rules. They didn't break when overwhelmed, didn't retreat when cornered, and didn't beg for mercy when outnumbered. Instead, they fought with a strange fire in their eyes, something beyond survival, beyond anger, beyond even revenge. Dominion psychologists, trying to analyze this behavior, came back with only one word to describe it: resilience. And that word began to spread like a shadow through the Dominion's upper ranks, spoken quietly, as if it carried weight too heavy for even them to bear. What shook the Zarkith most wasn't just the humans' refusal to surrender, but the way they fought even when there was nothing left to fight for. They saw footage of civilians in destroyed cities helping strangers dig through rubble with bare hands, of injured soldiers dragging comrades for miles, of children sending messages of hope to soldiers on the front lines. Entire towns had been wiped out, yet the survivors would stand, bloodied and bruised, holding makeshift flags in defiance. "These creatures do not know when to fall," whispered a Zarkith commander after losing his third offensive in the same ruined valley. "They rise like ghosts and fight like fire." And the worst part, he said, was the look in their eyes. It was not rage or hatred, but something calmer, something more dangerous. It was the look of people who had already accepted death and yet chose to live anyway. The Dominion's finest warriors, armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, began hesitating before missions. Some whispered to each other that humans were not normal, that they had something hidden inside them, something ancient and unstoppable, a force that no armor could block and no mind could fully understand. As fear began to infect the Dominion's once invincible image, cracks appeared in their strategies. Captains who were once ruthless became cautious. Commanders who demanded instant victory began delaying offensives, and in their hesitation, humanity found strength. The resistance grew bolder. Small victories turned into larger ones. Guerrilla attacks became coordinated strikes, and behind every counterattack was a message sent directly to Dominion channels. We're still here. No threats, no arrogance, just a quiet reminder that Earth had fallen. This message, repeated in every major language, became a symbol across the galaxy. Species who had once feared the Dominion began to take notice. Some started sending secret support. Others simply watched, curious about the species that refused to be broken. The Dominion could crush a planet, but they couldn't crush a spirit. And that realization was more terrifying than any weapon. One particular report sent shockwaves through the Zarketh High Council. A young warrior squad had been sent to eliminate a group of stranded human engineers. It should have been a simple mission, but instead of finding a panicked group begging for rescue, they found the humans building a trap. With music playing from a broken radio and a half-cooked meal still on the fire, they had fought like seasoned warriors, outsmarting and defeating a force twice their size. After the battle, the Zarketh survivors were brought home, not as heroes, but as warnings. One of them, barely 19 cycles old, was seen trembling before the council, whispering. They laughed. They knew we were coming, and they laughed. That phrase was repeated over and over again in secret meetings. It was not just the fighting that scared them. It was the humanity of humans. The ability to feel joy and pain, to stand when crushed, to fight not for glory, but for each other. That was something the Dominion had never trained for. They had created perfect soldiers, but forgotten how to fight a people who believed in more than survival. As fear settled deeper into their hearts, some Zarketh officers began questioning the war. Was it worth it to fight an enemy that grew stronger with every loss? That found power not in numbers, but in belief. A few even suggested retreat, an idea once considered treason. But they had seen it now with their own eyes. The humans were different, not because they had better weapons or smarter tactics, but because they carried something inside them that couldn't be stolen or copied. Something that turned fear into fuel and loss into courage. And as more soldiers returned with stories not of victory, but of confusion and dread, the Dominion began to realize a truth they had never faced before. The humans had something they didn't. Something invisible, something unbreakable, something terrifying. And in the great halls of their mighty warships, among stars they once ruled without challenge, the invincible finally felt it. The cold touch of fear. The Zarketh Dominion, once confident in its power, had finally met something it could not understand. An enemy that could not be measured, weighed, or predicted. Their fleets were massive, their weapons advanced, and their warriors flawless in discipline. But none of those things had prepared them for the strange force the humans carried within themselves. They searched every captured battlefield for clues. Scientists dissected equipment, studied human behavior, and even tested the psychology of prisoners. But the answer never came. Instead, what they found was something more disturbing. There was no single secret, no superweapon, no hidden technology. And yet, humans kept winning battles they were supposed to lose. They endured pain that should have broken them. They survived situations with no chance of escape. What disturbed the Zarketh most was how humans smiled through bloodied faces, cracked jokes while dying, and never seemed to let go of each other, no matter the cost. The Dominion called for an emergency war council, gathering the most brilliant minds across its empire to discuss what had now become a terrifying mystery. What exactly was the weapon that made humans so dangerous? A week later, The answer came in the form of a whisper from a military sociologist who had studied hundreds of battle records. "It has no shape," she said quietly. "Their strongest weapon, it lives inside them. It's their will." The room fell silent, because even the word will felt too soft, too human, to explain what the Dominion was facing. But the more they studied, the clearer it became. It wasn't just one thing. It was a mix of many small things: courage in the face of certain death, trust in strangers during chaos, unity even when broken. It was the way humans believed in something more than survival. They fought for each other, for ideals, for a home they refused to lose. They didn't need orders to resist. They just did. Even civilians stood in the way of fire, throwing rocks if they had nothing else. Old people, children, doctors, engineers, everyone fought. And the Zarkith had no way to fight that. Their armies were trained to crush resistance, but how do you defeat a spirit? How do you break something that isn't a weapon or a machine but a feeling? Their attempts to exploit human weakness backfired. They bombed cities hoping to break morale, but instead saw the survivors singing in the rubble. They captured leaders hoping to cause panic, only to see new leaders rise instantly, not by rank, but by choice. They even tried to use psychological warfare, holograms of fallen heroes, false broadcasts, fear campaigns, but humans refused to believe anything unless they saw it with their own eyes. Truth and lies meant nothing to them if it came from the enemy. What mattered was what they believed in their hearts. That was the weapon. It had no shape, no switch, and no limit. A Zarkith commander once captured a small human outpost in a cold, lifeless forest. His soldiers found only 10 defenders, all out of ammunition, bleeding, and exhausted. But instead of surrendering, those 10 stood tall, weapons raised as if they were fully armed. The commander ordered them to be spared and interrogated. He wanted to understand what made them stand like that. The oldest soldier among them, barely alive, looked at him and said, "Because someone has to." Those words echoed in his mind for weeks. The humans didn't need to be strong, or smart, or even armed. They just had to believe they were doing the right thing. That belief was stronger than any armor the Dominion could build. That belief was the weapon that had no shape, and that weapon was spreading. Across the galaxy, species once crushed by the Dominion began rising. They had seen the broadcasts of humans surviving the impossible. They heard the stories of resistance, of unity, of sacrifice, and suddenly, the image of the Zarkith as invincible gods began to crack. If humans could do it, if these fragile, emotional creatures could stand against giants, then maybe others could too. Inside the Dominion, fear was growing. Warriors refused missions to Earth. Some asked to be reassigned to lesser planets. Others quietly questioned their loyalty. The High Council issued new orders: capture more humans alive, learn the source of this invisible power, and destroy it. But nothing worked. The more they tried to understand, the less sense it made. How could laughter be a weapon? How could friendship make someone fight harder? They had no answer. So they tried harder to crush the spirit, not just the body. But the humans always returned. Sometimes as soldiers, sometimes as rescuers, sometimes just as messengers carrying hope. They couldn't be stopped because they didn't fear death. They feared failure. That was their shield. That was their sword. It had no shape, but it could cut through even the strongest enemy. The final proof came when a Dominion fleet ambushed a human convoy carrying no weapons, just supplies and civilians. The humans didn't flee. They didn't even raise shields. Instead, they opened communication and offered help to the injured Zarkith on board one of the damaged ships. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a trap. It was genuine. And the Zarkith commander, confused and shaken, couldn't understand it. Why would they show mercy to the same enemy that had burned their cities? The answer came from a human medic who replied simply, "Because that's what makes us human." The Zarkith had never known this kind of thinking. They couldn't fight it, couldn't control it. And slowly they began to realize the truth. The war was never just about technology or strategy. It was about something deeper. The real weapon humans used wasn't visible. It was their love for each other, their endless hope, their unbreakable belief that even in darkness, there is light. That was the weapon with no shape. And now, the Dominion knew it could not be stolen. It could only be felt and feared. The war had dragged on far longer than anyone expected, and the galaxy was tired. Stars burned silently over planets scared by explosions and loss, and the air in the high command halls of both the humans and the Zarkith Dominion was heavy with tension. The humans had survived what was supposed to be a swift defeat, and not only survived, they had become stronger, smarter, and more united with each battle. But survival wasn't victory, and both sides knew that a moment was coming when the entire future of this conflict would balance on a single action. It was on the desolate planet of Virex 9, a ruined outpost world no longer rich in resources, that the turning point arrived, not with a great battle of warships or nuclear fire, but with something far simpler and far more powerful. The Zarkith had planned a final strike, one that would decapitate the human resistance entirely. A special unit was trained to infiltrate the human council base, hidden beneath the crust of the dying planet, a place only accessible through underground rivers and magnetic tunnels. The Dominion believed that if they removed the minds behind the strategies, the human forces would fall apart like a machine with its gears stolen. But what they didn't know was that humans were never just machines. They were something else entirely. As the elite Zarkith squad entered the tunnels, moving like shadows, they encountered unexpected resistance. Not soldiers, but workers, engineers, even medical staff. No one was armed properly, but all stood in the way, delaying the advance with everything they could. It wasn't a fight to kill, it was a fight to stall, and it was working. Word spread quickly through the base that the enemy had broken through, and instead of panic, there was action. Every person took a role, whether it was blocking a path, moving supplies, helping the wounded, or protecting the command center. Even children from the shelter level passed messages through hidden passages. The Dominion squad, used to crushing resistance with fear, began to feel something strange. Delay after delay, obstacle after obstacle, not from weapons, but from pure determination. Their mission, which was calculated to take 10 minutes, had stretched into hours, and the longer it took, the more prepared the humans became. Outside the planet, a small human fleet, heavily outgunned, was engaging the Dominion warships not to win, but to buy time. They knew they wouldn't survive, but they kept fighting, each captain making sure the base below remained untouched long enough for the miracle to happen. And then, without warning, it did. The miracle wasn't an explosion or secret technology. It was a message. From a small colony world once forgotten in the early days of the war came a transmission, short, shaky, but filled with emotion. We have risen. The Zarkith no longer control us. We stand with Earth. Then another message, from a mining moon on the edge of Dominion space. We saw what humans did. We want to be free too. One after another, systems long silent began to speak, to rise, to rebel. The war that had felt like a one-on-one struggle between humanity and the Dominion was no longer just about two sides. It was becoming something far bigger. The spirit of resistance, once born in a small blue world, had spread like fire in dry grass. Entire species began fighting back, not for humans, but because of them. They had seen the unbreakable will of a race that refused to give up, and it gave them hope. Hope, the most dangerous weapon of all. And suddenly, the Dominion realized it was no longer fighting humans. It was fighting an idea. On Virex 9, the Dominion team reached the inner core of the base, but what they found was not chaos or weakness. It was calm coordination, civilians standing beside soldiers, young and old working together, as if they had trained their whole lives for this. The leader of the Zarkith squad hesitated for the first time in his career. His orders were clear: eliminate the human command. But he saw no fear in their eyes, only strength. He saw no hatred, only resolve. And in that moment, he understood that killing them would not end the war. It would only make their legends stronger. He had studied humans for years, but now, facing them, not as targets but as people, he saw the truth. They were not winning because they were better. They were winning because they believed in something no empire could erase. The squad withdrew, a rare decision. And when questioned later, the leader gave no excuses. "You cannot kill a storm by stabbing the wind," he said. Back in the Dominion capital, chaos broke out as news of revolts and losses piled in. The High Council called for tighter control, stricter rule, but it was too late. The people had seen too much. They had seen fear in the eyes of the invincible. That fear had spread faster than any virus. Because if the humans could make the Dominion afraid, then maybe the Dominion was not invincible after all. That one moment, that one mission, that one choice, to stand, to resist, to believe, became the turning point. It didn't end the war, but it changed its direction forever. And from that point onward, the Dominion stopped asking when the humans would fall. They started wondering how long they could survive this storm, a storm made not of weapons, but of will. The war had reached its most dangerous stage, a time when every side believed the next move would decide everything. Across hundreds of star systems, both humans and the Dominion were locked in brutal battles, while neutral species watched from the shadows, waiting to see who would fall and who would rise. But deep inside the heart of Earth's hidden research station, buried under the icy surface of Europa, something unknown was being completed, something that did not look like a weapon at all. It had no barrel, no warhead, no steel frame or explosive charge. It was silent and strange, built using ancient knowledge recovered from long-lost human civilizations, mixed with alien data stolen from Dominion archives. It was a machine of thought, a device meant not to destroy bodies, but to reach minds. The humans had named it the Catalyst, and they believed it could do something no weapon ever had. Change the will of an empire, not by fear, but by truth. But no one knew if it would work. Some thought it was just another desperate human trick. Others believed it was too dangerous, too unknown. And yet, when Earth stood on the edge of total destruction, they activated it. The catalyst released no sound, no light. It simply sent out a pulse through subspace, a wave not of energy but of information. Memories, voices, images, all carefully chosen and shaped into something more powerful than any missile. The truth about humanity. It showed the story of Earth, the rise and fall, the wars, the peace, the mistakes, the forgiveness, the struggle for survival, the courage to hope, and the power to unite. It spread across the galaxy like a wind, reaching the minds of billions, soldiers, leaders, slaves, scientists, even the children who had never seen anything beyond the walls of their homeworlds. For the first time, they didn't just hear about humans. They felt them. They felt the pain of a mother who lost her child in a bombing. They saw the last stand of a human medic protecting both human and alien wounded. They felt the fear of Earth's leaders when the stars first turned against them, and the unshakable will of people who stood tall when surrender was easier. The catalyst opened a door inside every living mind, showing them not what humans could destroy, but what they could endure, what they could become, and what they could inspire. And then everything changed. Across Dominion territory, soldiers stopped fighting, not out of fear, but confusion. Some lowered their weapons and looked at the stars in silence. Commanders struggled to give orders, but their troops were no longer listening with blind loyalty. In cities that had once been ruled with iron control, protests broke out, quiet at first, then louder. Species that had lived under the Dominion for generations began to speak out, and when punished, they resisted harder. The Dominion tried to block the transmission, but it was too late. The catalyst had already done its work. It was not just a weapon. It was a mirror. And when the galaxy looked into it, it no longer saw humans as enemies. It saw them as proof that survival was possible, Even the Dominion's own scientists and officers began to question the Empire's strength, wondering if perhaps they had misunderstood what true power looked like. It was not in domination, but in resilience. Not in fear, but in unity. Not in destruction, but in the courage to keep standing after being broken. The final battle never came. Instead, planets began to declare independence. Whole fleets refused to follow orders. An uprising started from within, slowly breaking apart the Dominion from the inside. And through it all, humans did not rush to take over. They waited, watched, and offered help to those who wanted to rise on their own. In the end, it was not the strongest army, the most advanced ship, or the deadliest weapon that changed the galaxy. It was a message, a vision, a simple idea that even the smallest species, when united by purpose, can shake the stars. The catalyst remained silent afterward, never used again, never needing to be. Its one strike had already reached every heart it was meant to touch. Historians would later write that this was the moment everything turned, not when the first shot was fired, but when the first truth was shared. And so, the galaxy was not won by force, but by understanding. And humanity, once feared and hunted, became something greater, a symbol of what was possible. The weapon had no shape, but it had changed the future forever.